It's finally here, my 10th recipe video. I couldn't have done it without all your love and support, so thank you so much. Welcome to my channel, there's gluten-free Symphony. I'm extremely excited about this one because it's so near and dear to my heart. It's my gluten-free bread recipe. This was one of my first test recipes ever since I had to go on a gluten-free diet. It's the quintessential bread recipe. It's got a crusty exterior, a soft, light and airy interior, and packed with those enticing fresh bread aromas. I can't wait to show you this recipe, so let's get into it, shall we? So the first thing you'll need to do is prepare your baking tin. I'm using a 9 by 5 inch tin. Lightly grease all the sides of the tin with either oil or ghee. I'm using ghee here, and then sprinkle it with some white rice flour. Tap the tin to release any excess flour, and now you have an evenly greased and floured tin. This prevents your dough from sticking to the tin and also gives the finished loaf a rustic look. Now set aside and move on to measuring out your dry ingredients. I've got 200 grams of Jowar flour in a bowl here, and to that I'm adding 100 grams of rice flour, 20 grams of cornstarch, 1.5 teaspoons salt, and 1 tablespoon whole fennel seeds, just to give it that extra flavor punch. Whisk all of that together till everything is well combined, and now set that aside. So this recipe contains precisely 400 grams of water. Make sure to weigh out your water and do not judge it by volume, as 400 ml is not equivalent to 400 grams. You need to use exact quantities when working with bread dough, particularly gluten-free bread dough. As I'll be blooming some yeast in this water, I've already warmed it up to 40 degrees Celsius. I'm using a kitchen thermometer to determine the temperature. You could also just dip your finger for a couple of seconds and it should be around lukewarm, or just warmer than your body temperature. Any hotter and your yeast will die almost instantly. Now add 1.5 tablespoons of honey. You could also substitute with maple syrup or plain sugar. I like the depth of honey. This helps activate your yeast and also helps determine whether it's alive. Moving on to what makes this a bread, the yeast. I'm using instant yeast here. This is the brand I'm using, but any brand is fine. As far as yeast blooming goes, they say it's not required to bloom instant yeast, or you might prematurely activate its rising tendencies. However, in one of my first test batches, I directly added the yeast to my dry ingredients and it didn't work out well, which means it was a dead batch. So I like to check if my yeast is alive by whisking it in warm honey water for a minute or two till I notice bubbles on the surface. If you're using active dry yeast, you may need to proof it for about 10 minutes or till it's frothy. My yeast is alive and kicking. There's something I never thought I'd say. Anyway, once you know your yeast is alive, topple in 20 grams of psyllium husk. Psyllium husk is vital in gluten-free baking as it mimics the elasticity gluten provides in order to trap the carbon dioxide the yeast releases, giving you a light, spongy interior. I guess this is the most widely available brand of husk in India, but any brand should do. Whisk it in till there are no dry specks. Now add half tablespoon of vinegar. I'm using apple cider. You could use white vinegar as well. It just balances out that sweetness from the honey. Next, you'll need to add 20 grams of ghee. I've tested this recipe out with oil as well, and I prefer the rich, creamy profiles the ghee brings to the loaf. Some fat is essential to keep that loaf a little moist. I've not tested this out with butter, so if you do, let me know how it turns out. Now you'll need to whisk all of this together once more, just to incorporate the vinegar and the ghee into the yeasty psyllium mix. It should resemble a thick, almost goopy porridge. I began preheating my oven to 215 degrees Celsius at this stage, as it takes approximately 10 to 15 minutes to preheat. So you be the judge of your own oven. Now carefully topple this wet mix into your dry ingredients. Make sure to scrape down your bowl thoroughly, as every gram of this yeasty psyllium mix is essential to achieving the perfect bread. Clean off your implements thoroughly as well and get every last drop from that bowl. stir all of that together by folding the dry ingredients into that goopy wet mix. Keep stirring till it looks partially dry and then begin kneading with your hands. It is a little sticky at this stage, but keep mixing it with your hands. I guess you could use an electric mixer with a dough hook attachment. I've never tried that before. I love the simplicity and feel of mixing it with my bare hands. Also, it is a rather soft dough, so kneading it by hand feels quite relaxing. Don't be afraid to squeeze the dough through your fingers while kneading. This ensures that all your flour is getting evenly hydrated. It should take roughly 3 to 5 minutes for the dough to come together. Now clean off your hands and empty it out onto a lightly floured surface. I've just used plain old rice flour for this. Continue kneading using both hands if necessary, till the dough has an almost smooth exterior. Shape the dough to fit your loaf tin and gently place it inside. I'm just patting it down till it touches all the sides. Now you'll need to cover it with a cloth and let it stand for about 10 minutes. Of course, ambient temperature matters a lot here, so if it's 25 to 30 degrees Celsius, 10 minutes is just fine. If it's any colder, I guess keeping it for a couple of extra minutes wouldn't hurt. But I must say, it's always better to underproof your dough than to overproof it. I've made that mistake before and the crust just ripped apart from the interior crumb during baking and, well, to cut a long story short, it was a disaster. Anyway, after 10 minutes, it's risen a bit and I'm quite happy with this. Keep in mind, it will continue to rise during the baking process. Pop that dough into a 215 degrees Celsius preheated oven and let it bake for 1.5 hours. Yup, it does take that long. But hey, this gives you enough time to clean up and relax a bit. Maybe even continue that book while you're at it. With the power of cooking videos, this loaf is totally baked. And it's looking super good. Just look at that beautiful brown crust. Now you'll have to simply upturn it onto a wire cooling rack. Place the tin upside down first and give it a couple of taps, just to loosen the base a little. These mittens prevented me from gripping onto the tin, so I needed to use a spoon to lift the tin away from the loaf. Wow, it's left the tin so cleanly. And that's your perfectly rustic, gluten-free loaf. Now just keep it on the wire rack to cool completely before cutting into it. As tempting as it may be, do not slice into it till it's fully cooled down, as the residual heat will continue to cook the interior crumb and the gradual release of moisture will help retain the overall structure. I let mine cool for around 3 to 4 hours before I sliced into it. Slicing time! I'm using a bread knife to saw into this magnificent loaf. First, listen to that top crust. That's music to my ears. Using a sawing motion, cut into the loaf. You could cut thick or thin slices, whatever you prefer. A little tip, if you're going to be storing this in the freezer, slice the entire loaf and store it in an airtight freezer-safe container, and it will stay good for up to a month. Now I just got to show you that interior crumb. It tears open just like a regular gluten bread. Look how perfectly dispersed all those air bubbles are. Just beautiful. There have been days where I've eaten this bread absolutely plain without any spreads, because to me it's already so flavorful with those toasty fennel seeds. But of course you need an accompaniment, so slather it in garlic butter, crunchy peanut butter, or make a sandwich out of it. I've had it every possible way. It's such a versatile bread. Now it's up to you to decide how you like to have your bread. So drop in a line or two in the comment section below. I'd love to hear about your favorite accompaniments. Mine's crunchy peanut butter. And yes, if anyone's wondering, it does go with the fennel. Like I said, I've tried it every possible way. Because this is such a versatile bread, you could honestly substitute the fennel for anything else, such as olives, dried herbs, or you could just leave it plain, whatever your heart desires. I personally love the flavor of fennel. All this talk about delicious spreads has got me salivating, so I'm gonna take a bite into this now. Cheers! Yummy. The crunchy peanut butter complements the crustiness of this bread, and the soft, moist interior makes me want to take another bite out of this. Thanks for sticking around for another one of my recipe videos. Do give this bread a shot, and if you have any queries, let me know. I'd be happy to help. Take care.